Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Marco Rubio tells reporters the US will move on from Ukraine if a peace deal is not reached within days. At least 74 people are dead as the US military destroy a fuel terminal in Yemen, taking aim at the Houthis. And the fallout over a mistaken deportee continues as a US senator travels to El Salvador to meet him. To our top story, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said the US will move on from Ukraine peace efforts if there is no sign of progress. After attending talks with EU leaders in Paris, Rubio said the Trump administration would not continue with the endeavor for weeks and months on end, as the US had other priorities to focus on. Here's what he told reporters.
But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well. And so we've talked about outlines of both sides. I thought we had positive meetings yesterday. Obviously, the Ukrainians have to go back home. They have to run it by their president. They have to take into account their views on all of this, and we hope to hear back from them very soon.
I'm now joined by John Kavulich, Senior Editor for Outcome Modeling Analysis. John, thank you so much for joining me. So is the threat to move on from the talks genuine?
It is. It's what we're watching is President Trump's way of communicating, and whether it's he directly or the people that he brings in around him. And he tends to communicate in a way that, most of us don't appreciate, because we've generally been surrounded by diplomatic speak, and we've been surrounded by governments that are opaque in terms of how they discuss what they want to do. And President Trump started as candidate Trump. I can finish it in 24 hours. I can finish it before I'm inaugurated. I can finish it, in 100 days. And then Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State today, said, "Hey, we're getting ready to call it a day." And that statement, though, isn't definitive, nor is it saying to whom he's talking. He's sort of putting it out there, because he wasn't just talking to Russia and to Ukraine. He's also talking to NATO, and he's also talking to the EU.
So, John, the Kremlin insists progress has been made after Marco Rubio's peace talks warning we've just been speaking about. But we've also heard President Trump criticizing Putin. Do you think this is a wake-up call for Russia, or are they trying to push everyone, NATO, Europe, Russia, everyone involved?
It's a group push. However, you are correct in that if we had to choose, to whom is Secretary of State Rubio more directing than not, and he's more directing to Foreign Minister Lavrov and to President Putin, because the Ukrainians didn't want to do what President Trump wanted them to do at the beginning, which was the clean ceasefire. Just pick a day, pick a time, stop shooting, 30 days. Within the 30 days, then we start talking about how to move forward on negotiating an actual peace. Ukraine eventually bought into it. The Russians did privately, not publicly, and they've been vacillating back and forth, adding conditions, etc. So President Trump, as he said, I think he used the word pissed off, that, he was dragging. But even when he was criticizing the President Putin for dragging things along, he then said, I sort of admire that because I've done that too in my real estate. So, he tends to balance everything, or attempt to balance it, but the message was more to the Kremlin than it was to Kiev.
And John, I know that you have actually visited Ukraine. And if we think about it, it's been 2 months since Donald Trump initiated negotiations. What did you witness in your visit there? And do you think that there's actually anything to show for these ceasefire talks that have been ongoing?
Well, I guess the most visible way or visual way to mention that is that my last stop in Ukraine was in Sumy. Which, as you know, recently, just got hammered by the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and when you're there when you're on the ground and you see the destruction, and I was there in Kharkiv on the 24th of February, 2022, when the war started, and going back continually, and at the same time, into the Russian Federation, into Kursk this time, and I was in Belgorod. And they've been the targets of the Ukrainian armed forces. So it's incredibly stressful for the Ukrainian people because they're just looking at this now 4 years, and where is it ending? And every time they hear, particularly whether it was the Biden-Harris administration, now the Trump-Vance administration, that they're making progress, or they'll hear statements by officials that we've had good meetings, and then the meetings take place in Istanbul, the bilateral meetings with Russians and Americans, or the Ukraine-U.S. meetings in Saudi Arabia. And so there's this positiveness, and then these missiles strike, and these people get killed. So for the Ukrainians, they're tired. And, I think that there's a tremendous amount of pressure on President Zelensky to make a deal. Most of the problem in concluding any kind of peace agreement, and I use that word really, really lightly, is going to be that we're looking at the real estate that the Russian Federation currently controls. And the Ukrainians are not going to put into a document, we recognize that we've lost them and then they now belong to Russia. Russia may go along with language that isn't quite that definitive, but for President Zelensky, it's really, really tough. And I think that's what they're coming to terms with, that if this wants to get stopped, they're going to have to accept some language that they really, really don't want to accept.
John Kavulich, a senior research editor for Outcome Modeling Analysis. Always great to have you on the show. Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Let's get into this further with Ukrainian MP Oleksii Goncharenko. Great to have you on the show, Oleksii. Top US officials gave pretty mixed signals about the prospect of a ceasefire in Ukraine today. Is there growing concern over the confusion?
Hi, definitely we can't really understand where we are in these negotiations. But what we do understand is that Putin doesn't want any peace. President Trump wants peace, but to achieve it, he needs to put pressure on Russians. That's it. If he will do this, then we have a chance. If not, nothing will happen. So I hope that President Trump will put pressure on Russians and will push them towards the negotiation table and a ceasefire. We hope, fingers crossed.
Ukraine and the US are preparing to sign a memorandum of intent on the minerals deal. I was having a look at the draft proposal. It doesn't clarify whether profits from the investments will be used to pay back the US for previous military aid under the Biden administration. Are you able to give us a more clear idea of how this minerals deal is actually going to work?
Me neither. I also don't know what will be, how the draft will look like, and I think nobody knows because it's still not prepared. What we have yesterday was signed memorandum between two sides, but it was just an agreement to have agreement. For the moment, that's it. What is important for Ukraine, first, is that we can't accept debt, which was not a debt, retroactively. So it looks like we received what we received. It was support, but now, and it was said that it is free of charge. And now we're said that, okay, here is the bill, and here is the percents and interest on this money, annual interest. I think it's unacceptable, both because it's not fair, and second, because it will open the Pandora box, and other countries can raise the same questions. So that is unacceptable. But I hope that we will find an agreement. In the previous draft, which was not unfortunately signed because what had happened in Oval Office in the end of February between two presidents, but that was absolutely okay. So I hope we will come back to something of that language. And second thing which is unacceptable is any things which will stop Ukrainian European integration. Because for us, it's absolutely strategically important. So these two things are important. In everything else, we can negotiate. I hope we will find a solution because we need Americans, we need United States.
Russia's defense ministry is accusing Ukraine of attacking Russian energy facilities, despite a US deal to stop this from happening. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, Russia will accuse us in everything all the time, what they're doing. When they were preparing the war, they were accusing us to prepare it. Then when the whole world was telling them, guys, you will attack Ukraine soon. Putin was saying, no, it's just a military training, you know? So, like, is there any sense to comment what Russia says? We want peace. We want peace. That's it. We are ready for a complete ceasefire in the air, in the sea, on the land, any moment. Tomorrow, great. So that's it. So don't listen to Russian propaganda. We want peace. We are ready for ceasefire any moment.
Ukrainian MP Oleksii Goncharenko, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Hamas want a comprehensive deal to end the war in Gaza and swap all the Israeli hostages for Palestinians jailed in Israel. That's according to a senior Hamas official. The group's Gaza chief, who leads the negotiating team, said they would no longer accept interim deals for Israel, which could lead to more devastating attacks. The Trump administration has revealed plans to charge port fees on Chinese ships as it attempts to restore U.S. shipbuilding. The charges would start in 180 days' time and would increase in the coming years. The U.S. want to challenge China's dominance in the industry, despite concerns that the measures may further disrupt global trade after Trump's tariffs. 2 people were killed and 6 others injured after a police officer's son opened fire with her former service weapon at Florida State University. The alleged gunman, 20-year-old student Phoenix Eichner, was shot by police and then taken to hospital. The motive remains unclear. And a 24-year-old YouTuber arrested by Indian authorities after visiting an off-limits island in the Indian Ocean has been further detained in custody. Mikhail Vitorik Polikov will appear in court in Port Blair on the 29th of April. Polikov claims he was hoping to make contact with a reclusive tribe in the region. Now, airstrikes carried out by the US on a key oil terminal in Yemen have killed at least 74 people. That's according to the Houthi health ministry. It's one of the deadliest strikes since President Donald Trump ordered US forces to intensify their bombing campaign last month in response to the Houthis' attacks on Red Sea shipping. We can now speak to military analyst and former Air Vice Marshal Sean Bausch. Sean, thank you so much for joining me. So, fresh US strikes on Yemen with 74 people dead, search teams still looking for casualties. How damaging is this attack for the Houthis, who have already been significantly weakened?
Yes, hello, Leigh Ann. Pleasure to join you. Yes, it has been a pretty significant strike, certainly the deadliest for some time. Not only the 74 killed, but we understand 171 injured. And as you say, I wouldn't be at all surprised if the death toll rises. The target was the Ras Issa fuel terminal, where apparently 3 million barrels of oil are stored there. So it's a pretty significant target and will undoubtedly have degraded. I think what's interesting here is that the US policy has been ideally to deter the Houthis from conducting attacks. When that didn't work, they were seeking to degrade them. Now, of course, the Houthis come out in sympathy with Hamas. And when the 2-month ceasefire happened between Israel and Hamas, the Houthis stopped their attacks. I was not aware that they had actually resumed those attacks, but this big stick by President Trump is clearly designed to demonstrate to the Houthis, probably intelligence-led, that if they are to resume attacks, they will be dealt with very severely by the Trump administration.
The Houthis are vowing to hit back at these intensifying US raids we've just been talking about. But what kind of military might do they have and could unleash?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the challenges is the Houthis are not really a credible First World War fighting nation. And to try and take on the United States, the sort of primary military power in the world, it will be folly. Now, the Houthis do have support of Iran. They are a proxy of Iran, and therefore they have a number of weapons like cruise missiles from Iran. They have unmanned air vehicles, pretty long-range ones. They have the Wahid unmanned air vehicle, which is like the Shahid drone that the Russians have been using against Ukraine. They also got naval drones as well, and of course a significant number of soldiers. Now, those number of soldiers, it's very difficult to work out exact numbers, but it's believed they have about 100,000. So there are all sorts of ways that they could strike back, and it almost certainly this strike won't have dented the Houthis' intent very much, but it does depend on the resupply of missiles and arms from Iran. And it may well be that American intelligence fed that Iran was putting more missiles their way, and therefore they proactively struck.
So Iran's foreign ministry has said it strongly condemned the strikes as barbaric. These comments come ahead of these critical talks between Iran and the US this weekend in Rome. Sean, could this attack hinder these discussions?
Well, Leigh Ann, I must confess I'm not a believer in coincidences. And traditionally with the Houthis, the Americans or the allies have struck the Houthis when they have continued the attacks. I don't think it's a coincidence that this attack has happened very shortly before those talks with Iran. Because actually, although we're focused on the Houthis now, but in reality, if Iran was to get a nuclear weapon, then it presents an existential threat to Israel. Israel is really keen to snuff that out. And part of the reason that President Trump is having these talks with Iran is to try to stop it creating a nuclear weapon. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's a carrot and a stick approach here. Iran would wonder whether President Trump really had the intent to strike Iran. And by actually striking the Houthis in quite a significant way, it sends a very powerful message to Iran that he's not bluffing. And if they don't take these talks seriously, then America would be probably ready to support Israel in some form of strike to wipe out any form of nascent nuclear capability on behalf of Iran.
The Houthi leader vowed to continue attacks if the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas was breached. You mentioned that to me earlier. We are, of course, aware this has broken apart. Do you think this will add further pressure on Hamas to come back to the negotiating table and on Israel?
It could do, but I do think the pendulum is swinging slightly in the Hamas conflict. At the moment, Hamas have said they are ready to negotiate, but they're not prepared to do it bit by bit and simply return to fighting. What Hamas has turned around and said that there are sort of 59 hostages, I think, still remaining, of which 24 are believed to be still alive. And Hamas has said, look, we are prepared to hand over all the hostages, dead and alive, in return for peace and in return for the release of some Palestinian hostages. Now, by contrast, what Israel has offered, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, no, we'll give you a 45-day ceasefire if you release 10 hostages, and then we'll return to fighting again. But I do think there is a growing concern in Israel at the moment about the lack of progress on the release of hostages. And quite bluntly, as a former military guy, it's very difficult to see how you'd ever be able to completely eradicate Hamas. They have devastated Hamas's military capability. Aid has stopped flowing into the region. That is a devastating humanitarian crisis. And it's very difficult to see how this will ever end, given that Prime Minister Netanyahu has not made clear what the political end state is. So there is a whole mix of stuff here to do with Netanyahu's political future, but I don't think Hamas is in any position at the moment to do any sort of deal unless it's a final deal that guarantees the end of the war.
Military analyst and former Air Vice Marshal Sean Bell, brilliant to have your thoughts. I appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Leigh Ann.
Now, a Maryland senator has met with the deported Salvadorian man, Kilmar Abrigo Garcia, who was mistakenly sent to a mega prison in El Salvador. Democrat Chris Van Hollen posted pictures of the pair as he fights for his return to the United States. However, the White House have criticized the meeting, saying the Democrats' top priority is the welfare of an illegal alien MS-13 terrorist. Meanwhile, the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, also took to social media to say Kilmar Abrigo Garcia, miraculously risen from the death camps and torture, now sipping margaritas with Van Hollen in the tropical paradise of El Salvador. Now that he's been confirmed healthy, he gets the honor of staying in El Salvador's custody. We're now joined from Washington by our correspondent, Caroline Malone. Caroline, great to have you on the show. OK, some dark humour there from the El Salvador president and self-proclaimed world's coolest dictator.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly some dark humour. But I think it's important to remember what has been agreed between the United States and El Salvador. And that is that, according to reports, El Salvador receives $20,000 a year for every person that has been sent from the United States to El Salvador and held in their custody. We're talking about around $6 million a year. So clearly the motivation is for Bukele to keep hold of every inmate, to keep hold of everyone, including Abrego Garcia, who, by all accounts, is going to be remaining in El Salvador for the time being. That both according to Bukele and according to President Trump.
The Trump administration is clearly furious at Senator Chris Van Hollen for interfering in this situation.
That's right. Well, the White House has been very clear that they view Abrego Garcia as a criminal. They say that he's a member of the MS-13 gang. They say they have evidence for this. In fact, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, said a few weeks ago she had the evidence on her desk. And even though he was sent mistakenly to El Salvador, he was still a criminal. However, the public have not seen this evidence. It's not publicly known what this evidence is and how, in fact, he has been tied to any kind of gang activity or any kind of criminal activity. But the Trump administration is insisting he is a criminal and Van Hollen shouldn't be, interfering in this situation. He should be instead focusing on his own constituents, the people that he represents ultimately. And I should say that across the nation, Trump's immigration policies are popular. Border security was right up there at the top of campaign issues. And that is something that resonates very much with voters here in the United States, even though we're having this now very controversial case.
Garcia's lawyers deny any gang affiliation as well as any criminal convictions or charges. Where does he stand now from a legal viewpoint? Caroline, it appears that we have lost our communication with you. Apologies for that. Caroline Malone in Washington, thank you. Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. President Trump is expected to meet King Charles in September in a second state visit to London. The UK hopes it will boost ties between the two countries. Trump told reporters he had great respect for the British King and his heir, Prince William, and saw the invitation as a great honour. A man has hijacked a plane in Belize, stabbing 2 passengers and the pilot before being shot dead by one of the stabbed passengers. The Tropic airplane took off from Corozal to San Pedro with 16 on board when the incident took place. A US State Department spokesperson has described the incident as horrifying. 4 people have died near Naples after a mountain cable car plunged to the ground. Italian media claim 2 Brits and 2 Israelis were killed and another seriously injured at Mount Fitio. It's believed the car was near the top of the mountain when one of the cables snapped. An investigation has now been launched. And the Trump administration has paused construction of a wind farm off the coast of New York. The Empire Wind 1 project was intended to provide electricity for 500,000 homes, according to the US Interior Secretary. The wind farm had been rushed through by the Biden administration without sufficient analysis. Convicted killers Eric and Lyle Menendez will face a re-sentencing hearing from the 9th of May, which could see them freed after 3 decades in jail. Yesterday, a judge postponed the highly anticipated hearing after the brothers fought with the prosecutors who disagreed with their release. Eric and Lyle were convicted for killing their parents in Beverly Hills when they were 18 and 21 years old. Their story was recently retold in a Netflix series, leading to a surge in global support. Speaking outside court, their lawyer, Mark Garridos, demanded the public prosecutor be removed from the case.
We are filing a motion to recuse the district attorney in this case. We set a date of May the 9th. The family does not want to go through this charade anymore with the DA. They are going to, I anticipate, the motion hasn't been written yet, but given what transpired today and given what's obvious to anyone, I think, who has a couple of synapses that are still firing, this is a DA who made up his mind and did no hard work in terms of his position.
We can now get the latest from our correspondent, Sara Firth. Sara, thank you so much for joining me. So, first of all, why has there been this new delay?
Well, Leigh Ann, this is America's most famous convicted siblings, and They appeared in court, 10 of their family members appeared in court, ready to go. But this delay coming about essentially because of a legal wrangling. Now, this is centered around a risk assessment form that the prosecution has said they wanted the judge to be able to see to be part of this trial. Now, this is something that was undertaken whilst Eric and Lyle Menendez were in prison, and it was part of the process by which they present information to the parole board. So this risk assessment basically looks to give the information to the parole board as to whether there's an assessed risk, ongoing risk potentially to the public. What the prosecutors have said is they want this included in the trial, and so you've seen eventually the judge gaining access to this, and that is what has brought about this delay. Now, you've had, of course, very, very fiery scenes both inside the courthouse and outside the courthouse, and the Menendez family themselves expressing disappointment at this delay as the legal teams on both sides slug it out.
The brothers actually have a lot of high-profile support, haven't they?
They have. I mean, this case gained notoriety again, as you mentioned, Leigh Ann. There was this heavily fictionalized Netflix series about the brothers that gained a huge amount of public attention and discussion. These brothers have now been in prison for 3 decades. There's a lot of conversation around whether the US justice system is dealing nowadays differently with these types of violent crimes, given that there are allegations of family abuse and trauma in those situations. So you've got the likes of celebrity Kim Kardashian, who's known for championing these social justice causes, getting on board. And you've also had a huge public outpouring of support, and important to note, a lot of the Menendez family themselves standing behind Eric and Lyle with these allegations that they suffered this abuse at the hands of the mother and father that they murdered. You've had calls for the Menendez brothers to come clean. We've never really heard them publicly state what happened. The resentencing trial, as you said, is now set for May 9th, and all eyes are really going to be on that and how that proceeds. But this delay, interestingly, you've had the Menendez brothers, of course, not yet commenting on it, but they had said previously in an interview that they remained cautiously hopeful. But reports today that from people who were inside the court, that the brothers themselves looking a little downcast and defeated at this delay announcement.
And let's go back to the hearing. There's been strong statements from both sides, Sara. What exactly has been said?
Yeah, so the family speaking on the steps after this decision, expressing their disappointment. You've had the brothers' legal team, their lawyers saying this is a dog and pony show. And you heard in the clip that you played there, he is accusing the district attorney in this case of being biased and calling for him to be removed. That potentially poses another legal issue. As we said, there's a lot of legal wrangling going on here. Now, what had happened was you had a previous district attorney that was supportive, or openly making statements that seemed to be supportive of retrying and looking at this case again with this resentencing trial. What the Menendez brothers' legal team are asserting, they called it this dog and pony show, is that the prosecution and the district attorney are essentially trying to stall, delay, bring in issues, they say, like this risk assessment form, that aren't pertinent to the resentencing trial that should have been going ahead. So you've got this new date set for May 9th. You know, this is, as we said, gained a lot of attention because of these fictionalized accounts, but this is real life stuff, 3 decades in prison, the brothers getting their moment back in the limelight, and potentially for the first time, the public is going to hear more details, and importantly, through a different lens of, in this day and age, whether the trauma allegations, whether the abuse allegations shifts the perspective on the outcome of what they will be sentenced, because at the moment they face life in prison without parole. They're hoping the resentencing might shift that a little bit and give them a different sentence.
Sara, Firth, that Netflix documentary on the Menendez brothers was absolutely fascinating. So thank you again for joining me from Washington. Appreciate it. Let's take a look at the top business news. Alphabet's Google illegally dominates 2 markets for online advertising technology, according to a judge ruling. It's another blow for the tech giant and paves the way for US antitrust prosecutors to seek a breakup of its ad products. The decision comes days before Google faces another monopoly trial. The company says it will appeal the decision. President Trump has signaled a potential end to the tit-for-tat tariff hikes between the US and China that shocked markets. He's also said that a deal over the fate of social media platform TikTok may have to wait. Trump's comments further highlight a weakening appetite for sharply higher across-the-board tariffs on dozens of countries. Turning to the sports news now, Harry Maguire scored in the dying seconds of extra time to help Manchester United snatch a place in the Europa League semi-finals. They won with a sensational 7-6 aggregate victory over Olympic Alliance in the quarters. And speculation around Max Verstappen's future at Red Bull swirls. The champion says he is very relaxed ahead of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which is happening on Sunday. Red Bull's motorsport consultant, Helmut Marko, sparked speculation over Verstappen's future following the Bahrain Grand Prix. And a reminder of our top stories. Marco Rubio tells reporters the US will move on from Ukraine if a peace deal is not reached within days. At least 74 people are dead as the US military destroy a fuel terminal in Yemen, taking aim at the Houthis. And the fallout over a mistaken deportee continues as a US senator travels to El Salvador to meet him. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusifora is coming up next. That's followed by The Riz Khan Show. Goodbye and happy Friday.